Welcome to the second of a set of videos about Bali Unit, a unit testing framework for LotusScript, adapted from the unit testing framework that we created for VoltScript. In this video, I'm going to walk through getting started with the code. So I've gone to the release on GitHub, and I've downloaded BaliTestRunner.bss. And we can open that up. And the next step is just to copy and paste this code into a script library in Domino Designer. I'll just call it something else because I've already got one there. And then we just highlight and remove any code that's in there and just paste it in. And you'll see it's quite long, but then it pastes in, and this will then compile. So I'll just close that and go across to the one that I already had in there for a start. So you'll see that there's a number of classes in here and a couple of functions that we're using within the code. What we've also got is a static constant here for the location where the unit tests will be stored, because they're written out as either HTML or XML. And we've also got a type. Now, a type, if you haven't used these or come across them before, is like a class, except it can only have variables in it. It can't have properties, it can't have methods. So what I'm using this for here is to capture the information about each specific test case that's being run. We've then got, as I say, a number of classes here. I won't I won't cover the abstract classes at this point, but we'll cover off the others. So the Bali Test Suite report is not something you need to worry about. That's a class that's used to actually write out the HTML or XML report for a test suite or a bunch of test suites. That will get used when the Bali Test Suite or Bali Test Runner is deleted at the end of the code. It's picked up in that delete method. So you won't really need to worry about that. The two that you'll need to worry about are Bali Test Runner and Bali Test Suite. So a Bali Test Suite is a suite of tests, a bunch of assertions typically related in some way. The Bali Test Runner is then a harness for multiple test suites. If it's just a basic piece of a handful of tests that you want to run, then you can get away with just creating a Bali Test Suite, adding the assertions to that. But if you've got more tests, if you're testing a bunch of processes within your application, then the best way to do it is to create the Bali Test Runner. And so the unit testing framework, it's called unit testing, but it can also be used for integration testing. Typically, I have one test runner that I set up for all of my unit tests. Unit tests will be functions that can be tested without needing any particular data, any particular user, any particular operating system under the hood, any particular external databases. It's tests that can be run standalone and repeated ad hoc. The integration tests are then where you would cover testing with specific data, testing with specific users, for example. So let's walk through the structure and talk through how you would actually set up those unit tests. Now, the best place to do that is by looking at the documentation. So it's the writing unit tests bit that we'll cover off here. There are a number of core language functions that are used. This is very important for us for when we're running tests on the core language itself, but they're included here for your own reference. We've also got a bunch of FAQs here. One that's particularly relevant and hit me when I was converting this to LotusScript was error path not found on line 12 when it was trying to create a directory. And that's because the access code was running under did not have access to create directories in that folder. So that's just one to be aware of. Other than that, most of the FAQs are standard VoltScript and LotusScript ones. One particular one that's relevant is to do with the output from the unit tests. So the unit test output we are creating in a unit test directory relative to the program that's running it. So if you're running it from an agent triggered from the notes client, it will be under your HCL notes directory. If you're running it from a scheduled agent on the server, which you might do for user testing, for integration testing, for example, then it would be on the Domino server. The reason we're creating that output outside of the NSF is because this is project reporting. It doesn't make sense to generate it into the same database as is being delivered to the customer and the end user. It's project reporting. It's part of your project reporting. It should be generated separately, and there's a lot of additional benefits that we have from generating it as HTML or XML. We've also got project documentation here, and we've also got one of the first ones here is the Bali docs. So if you click on that, then you'll see the full documentation for all of the classes, so and all of the types there. So you can see what are the variables in a particular class, what are the methods. You can drill down to them and see what the arguments are, and some sample code for any of the methods. So that should be of particular use for seeing how to actually use the functionality. So coming back, let's look at writing the unit test. So as I said, there were two options that you have when creating unit or integration tests. One is to use a Bali test runner for aggregating multiple test suites, and the other is to create a single Bali test suite and output the code from there. So the Bali test runner, or rather the Bali test suite, will just create a single HTML file. The Bali test runner will create a directory for each run of it, and that will have an index.html if you're outputting as HTML, and a single separate HTML file for each of the test suites. But from the index.html, you can access all of them at the same time. So It's fairly simple to set those up. The constructors for both the Bali Test Runner and the Bali Test Suite take a string, which is the name that you want to give that test run or test suite. Now we're getting rid of the spaces when we create a directory or a file, but we're not doing any other fancy manipulation. So it's recommended that you stay with just basic ASCII characters for those. So when you create a test suite, you then add that test suite to a test runner. And then you're ready to start setting up your assertions. Now, we took particular care here to try and make it as simple as possible to set up tests. We want it to be brief, we want it to be descriptive, we want it to be clear what it's doing, and not overly verbose. So the describe method is a fluent method. It returns the test suite that it's being called upon. And then there are a bunch of assertions that you can do. Simplest ones, assert false, assert true, assert is, for example, to check the data type. So you can set up a single assertion for a test suite with just one line, and hopefully that should make it very clear for what you're testing. So that's the basics for setting up a test run and a test suite. In the next video, we'll go into some more detailed examples.